it is not surprising to me that we have a bill before us today that makes it more difficult to vote and will disenfranchise many people. And while the bill does pay for a voter ID card, it does not pay for the birth certificate or other documentation that you need to get one. And a birth certificate in Minnesota costs you $45. So there will be people that are poor, elderly, unable to get a birth certificate in order to get a voting card with a picture ID on it. But beyond that, what is more troubling to me than anything else is that we have a majority party in this chamber who ran on being fiscally conservative. Being fiscally conservative means you don't spend money you don't have. And as of today, we in the Minnesota Senate have not passed a balanced budget. So the fact that this bill carries with it a little over $5 million in new spending means that we're spending money here today that we don't have. We're spending money we don't have to solve a problem that is non-existent, and in the process, we will cause citizens of the state of Minnesota who are elderly and poor to have to spend money they don't have in order to be able to vote. So rather than make the job of the conferees that are out trying to resolve bills that don't balance the budget yet, finding more money, rather than having them have to find even more money because we passed this bill today, I would urge members to vote no on this measure.
President, members, thank you. You know, whenever I talk to folks who oppose the notion of a photo ID for voting, one of the first things to come out of their mouth is generally, everybody supports having an election system with integrity. Well, what could be a more important first step to the integrity of an election system than when I present to the poll to cast my vote, I simply have to demonstrate that I am the person I claim to be, that I am who I actually say I am. That is why we want a photo ID system, is so that people simply have to walk in to cast their vote and prove that they are who they say they are. It seems to me that that is absolutely at the root of electoral integrity, is to make sure that if you vote and you hold yourself out to be Dave Thompson, that you are. That's what this would accomplish. I'd also like to just address a few of the points made by Senator Sieben. As far as the budget deal goes, we were roundly criticized for setting early deadlines, for moving things quickly and getting the budget taken care of. I personally think that was a very good idea, because we've left plenty of time to get things done, but the fact of the matter is there are no budgets sitting in our committee waiting to be dealt with. They've all been put out of committee, they've all been voted on. We've done our job there, and that's why it's time to move on to some of the other important business of the state. Senator Sieben also talked about the need to be bipartisan. I think the fact is that if we were to listen to the people of Minnesota, this would be a bipartisan effort, because anecdotally, as well as looking at the data that I've seen, the vast majority of Minnesotans do support this common sense notion that, once again, when you show up to vote, you just demonstrate that you are who you purport to be. There's also a discussion about the fact that there's no need to do this because we don't have a lot of felons voting. That's not what this is an attempt to cause the problem. We're not trying to stop people from voting with this measure because of those kinds of things. What we're attempting to do is we are attempting to make sure that things like vouching for others doesn't result in fraud and those kinds of issues. So this isn't an attempt to address some of the things that many of the detractors say we're attempting to address. And finally, it is talked about the fact that voting is a right. Well, certainly voting is a right. We all acknowledge that not only is it a right, it is arguably the fundamental right that we as Americans have, because without input into the very political system that governs us, all of our other rights become meaningless. But there's two sides to this coin, folks. It is true that if there's a person out there who ends up not voting that should have been eligible to vote, that's unfortunate. But likewise, if somebody goes to the polls and votes for the candidates that I didn't vote for, and that person's voting illegally, I have been disenfranchised. So this argument works both ways. And in terms of this idea that this is the equivalent of a poll tax, the bill provides for a free ID. There's no charge. This is not a poll tax. This is simply a matter of people needing to demonstrate that they are who they say they are. It's a matter of common sense. The people support it, and I would encourage all of the members to support it.
I believe this is one of the greatest rights that we have in America, to vote. And to protect this right is something that I am very serious about wanting to do. I just wanted to share that I have a disabled son, and he has a photo ID. It's not that difficult to get. My wife and I went along with him. We helped him take the picture. He has his photo ID, and he can use it, and he has to use it from time to time. In fact, he has a checkbook. When my wife writes out a check out of his checkbook, they have to show his ID. So we need to show photo IDs for so many different things in the world today. To show it to vote, I believe, is a very minor thing, and I would challenge all those that are thinking that this is such a difficult thing to get, to join together with me and try to help those folks get a legal photo ID so that they can vote. I want to make sure everyone that has the right to vote should vote. Thank you.
Well, Madam Chair, Madam President, I want to go back to what Senator Thompson said earlier about us having our work done in the committees, and of course we know that's not true, and we have all the conference committee reports yet that we have to hear, and very little time left to hear them. But here we are spending a lot of time on this bill that is going to disenfranchise voters, because if it's not going to disenfranchise voters, what I want to know is, why are these 37 groups against it that include the Alexandra House for Battered Women, the Catholic Charities of St. Paul and Minneapolis, the Citizens for Election Integrity, the Jewish Community Action, the League of Rural Voters, the League of Women Voters, the Minnesota Consortium for Citizens with Disabilities, Minnesota Council of Nonprofits, Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center, Minnesota State University Student Center Association, Minnesota Unitarian Universalist Social Justice Alliance, Native Vote Alliance in Minnesota, Older Women's League of Minnesota, Our Savior's Community Services, St. Stephen's Human Services, Twin Cities Jewish Community, YWCA. Those are just some of the organizations that are against this bill, and that includes an awful lot of people in those 37 organizations. So I do think that these groups would not sign on as being against this unless they really believe there was going to be that voters are going to be disenfranchised. So I think that is obviously a problem. And also, the cost of this bill is another problem, of course. We don't know where we're going to get the money to solve our budget problems right now. But in addition to the $5 million or so that this bill allocates, Citizens for Election Integrity did a study, and I think they did a pretty good fiscal note on some of these issues, and they came up with something else that's not included in this bill, and that's $19.5 million that is estimated for voter education and outreach. So we're going to change the system here a year and a half before the next election, and we're not going to have any money included in this bill for voter education, $19.5 million. And Missouri estimated that would cost $17.4 million in Missouri to educate their voters on the change. We don't have that going on here. The other thing is that we talk about integrity in the system. Well, Minnesota actually has a system that has a lot of integrity. North Dakota doesn't even ask for voter registration if we're going to start comparing states. But here's what we have in Minnesota. We have voter registration. We have a registration oath. We have verification of newly registered voters. We have a statewide voter database. We have postal verification cards. We also have Minnesota Department of Corrections data. We have an election day oath. We have transparency on election day. We have post-election review of voters, transparency after election day, and investigations by county attorneys. Those 11 things we currently have already to make sure that we have integrity in the system. So I think we need to get back to the work that we were sent here to do this session, and that is to resolve this $5 billion shortfall. The final thing I want to say is that birth certificates has been mentioned as are $45. For those folks that don't have a driver's license and need to get a birth certificate to get a voter ID, or don't have a marriage license, which is less than a birth certificate but still costs, $45 amounts to a poll tax. We're saying if you don't have that $45 to get a marriage license or a birth certificate, you don't have any other form of ID, then you can't vote. Oh, very well. So, Madam President and members, this is a bad idea. Let's defeat it. Thanks.
President, I think after the last 2 recounts that we've had in Minnesota, that voters are concerned about voter integrity, and that there is a lot of talk in our communities about the importance of having proper identification. And so I have been at town hall meetings and been in community forums where my voters have expressed that as well. So I actually stand as somebody who's for having some sort of identification, and I think it is part of the future for Minnesota elections, and something that I would support. Having said that, I go back to the process about this bill. Senator Sieben talked about the bipartisan elections group that worked at the University of Minnesota with Professor Larry Jacobs. It was the year before last, and I was part of that group as well. We met week after week after week for a long period of time and looked at many issues with regards to elections. We had a matrix of things that were listed as things that needed reform, and we began with things we agreed upon most, and we worked out from there. It was controversial, it was challenging. I found myself sometimes, agreeing with Tom Emmer more than some of my other colleagues, and that was surprising. But actually, I was joking about that, but actually it was a very fulfilling experience in that we saw that we could come to agreement, and it was that process that allowed us to then change our primary date, as well as Senator Sieben and Senator Rust and many others worked on enacting many other election reforms. One of the biggest concerns I have had this session is that we have not engaged in a bipartisan way at the beginning of working on very important and challenging, complex issues. The leads of the chairs of the committees have not engaged the leads and have not said, let us try from the beginning to put together a bill that reflects the bipartisan makeup of the legislature and, for that matter, the state. I have said many times, there was no mandate. We have a Democratic governor and we have a Republican-led legislature. We actually have the opportunity to break new ground here in Minnesota by working together, finding where there is common agreement, and then hammering out where there are differences. So, for example, with this bill, one of the things I'm most concerned about are those who are not able to get this photo ID in a timely fashion. I've understood that in other states there's a process for an affidavit. The affidavit is something that allows somebody to vote on that day. In this bill, we have instead a provisional ability to vote. And then the burden is on the citizen to find a way to come back within 7 days. It is my belief that a system of an affidavit would be a much more inclusive process for those exceptions, and that in fact the fiscal note of tracking down those affidavits and making sure that that person is who they say they are would be much less expensive than devising this whole system whereby we have to pay for all these voter cards. If instead we had an exception system and then used our resources to make certain those who said they were someone without an ID could be verified. I think there are some common sense measures that could be done, and I understand that Senator Howe has a bill, which I haven't seen, that actually proposes an affidavit system. I think there are things that could be done. I want the people in my community to know that I hear their concerns, that I'm committed to addressing those concerns, that I'm actually hopeful that if this bill does get vetoed, that there will be an opportunity to work in a bipartisan way to solve some of the pitfalls and the challenges. It's not all right with me to sign or to vote green on a voter ID bill that the League of Women Voters is telling me that's a no. If the League of Women Voters has concerns, then I think we should hear their concerns and get them worked out. We have some time before the 2012 elections. Let's not just shut out those who we don't agree with. Let us use the legislative process. You know, I would have to commend Senator Gerlach. Senator Gerlach runs his committee in such a way that when those disagree, he gives them a charge, work it out, or don't come back here. There are many issues with this bill. I think I commend Senator Limmer for responding to what he hears as a growing public concern. Now, some may say that concern is invalid, and that's fine, but perception is reality, and I believe the public is concerned about voter integrity, and I don't blame them because we've had 2 tough recounts, and that leaves a concern in one's mind. This bill isn't there yet because it hasn't allowed itself to go through the process to work out the concerns of the many groups who have raised them. So I would urge Senator Limmer that if this doesn't work out, to approach this in another way, perhaps work with Senator Howe. I offer my assistance to be a part of this process and come to some agreement with regard to these activities. Now, having said that, I think our first priority is balancing the budget, and this could be done over the interim or next year. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Madam President. I just want to respond first to a couple comments made on the floor here. You know, and I know we get excited during the heat of debate and sometimes get confused with some of the facts, but I would point out some facts because it's been said that we don't work in a bipartisan fashion, and Madam President, members, I think that's certainly not true. You know, I'd point out the work that we did on the agriculture bill, the finance bill, the bill that was passed by the Senate, signed by the governor. We worked on that bill in a bipartisan fashion, members, and I know Senator Bonoff and some of the others you know, mentioned earlier that we weren't working that way, but you know, we are in the areas that we can, and we, in fact, we're working today on a bill we have up later in the Ag Committee, working with some of the minority members. So we are, some of us are trying to do what we can. So to paint us all with a broad brush, I don't think is quite fair, because I remember when we started the session, I went over to the State Office building and I met with the minority members of the committee, and some of those were surprised because they said, "Doug, what are you doing here?" And I said, "You're on the committee, and I want to introduce the staff to you, and I want to talk about how we'll do the committee, how we're going to operate it, and the rules," which we don't have any rules, and I said, "I want to know the opinions you have, and I want to know the ideas you have for the good of the state, because I don't claim to have all of the good ideas." And you know, a couple of the members told me that that's strange, nobody had done that before. Nobody had walked from the Capitol over to the State Office building before to meet with the minority members. So let's not paint us all with a broad brush.
And I thank Senator Bach for his points at least some of them, and I'm always flattered when my friend from the Iron Range quotes me. And so I was doing a quick check myself, Senator Bach. I was thinking about January and February and March, and I'm still looking for your budget. I'm still looking for your budget proposal. I'm still looking for the Senate DFL framework for a budget, which I agree is the most important thing we're doing this session. And you're sitting on the sidelines, Senator Bach. You're sitting on the sidelines on what you say is the most important thing to do. And we are not sitting on the sidelines. We've produced a budget, a piece of which has already been signed. Thank you, Senator Magnus. Thank you to all the members. That was a bipartisan piece of the budget. So we've got a few more conference committees rolling. That's another chance for you to engage. We've passed these in record time, and so we've got the ability to bring some other important measures to the floor of the Minnesota Senate. I dare say we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I think this is an important bill. I think when people look back on the 2011 legislative session, this will be in the top three. Absolutely. So I thank Senator Limmer for going through a legislative marathon, an obstacle course of 6 different committees, loads of time for participation, for amendment, for discussion, for testimony, at the same time that he's carrying a large omnibus budget bill. Well, not too large. So, Senator Bach, maybe I'm wrong and I missed something back in January or February or March in some of those articles that you quoted, but absolutely, we're going to stay on this budget and we're working to get done on time. And we're looking forward to your help with that.